Ready to light that fire by doing the things that make you come alive? Welcome to Health Raisers, a podcast for wise women. I'm your host, Dr. Nadine. I left a soul-crushing medical career full of bad news and evolved into a joyful health integration coach, helping hundreds of women find their healthy. You're more than your dress size. Stop putting up with toxic relationships, swallowing your true emotions, and sacrificing your mental health. Stop using your body as a battlefield. You're always giving. You deserve to put yourself first, not just for your sake, but for those you love. Wise women, let's make ourselves a priority right now. It's time to raise some health together. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to let you know that before you listen to this episode, if you have been a victim of domestic abuse, the content in this episode may be triggering. So I just want you to take good care of yourself and know that before diving in. All right. Yes. Hello, wise women. Today, my guest is Kim Davis. Kim is a wife, mother, crafter extraordinaire, and New Yorker to her core. She has a history in social work and currently is hosting a podcast by the name of Slaycation with her comedy writer husband and best friend Adam and longtime family friend Jerry. Kim, welcome. We are going to have a juicy conversation about anger.
Yes, girl, we sure are. And thank you so much, Nadine, for having me. I am honored to be here and looking very forward to this conversation.
I love when serendipity happens. And initially, it was supposed to be Adam on the podcast, but yes, we were managing to kind of have a conversation back and forth. And this match was made for today. So yes, I'm grateful.
Yes, me too. Absolutely.
So my first question for you is about your history in social work. I want to hear about how long you were in social work and what was your area of specialty.
Okay, well, I'll tell you, my social work history began with an agency called Women in Need. And my role at that point dealt primarily with research. And I was interviewing women across the board that were dealing with a variety of situational stuff, homelessness, addiction, those kinds of situations. One of the interesting components of Women in Need at that time was they were one of the only shelters that offered women a place to stay with their children while in recovery. So that was a huge thing. And part of the research was just collecting data, following the women after they left, moved into permanent housing, and just sort of track, how they were doing. And of course, and just offering and services as well, because a lot of times when women would move out and suddenly they're on their own, they have to now figure out and navigate services for themselves, for their kids. And so I would help with that as well. And then I began working with a agency that housed women who were leaving abusive relationships, and I functioned as a counselor for women in crisis situation escaping domestic violence, and this was a 24-hour facility, so somebody was always there. So I would work a variety of shifts. And that, of course, just women fleeing horrible situations, fleeing abuse, fleeing just these, in most of these cases, awful, awful partners, awful, awful men. And we're escaping and literally living in fear.
I have so many questions. All right. Okay. All right. Let's start with on behalf of the survivor. Okay, so you're working with domestic abuse survivors, and I'm sure you have so many stories that you should not have.
Yes, yes, indeed.
So I have no doubt that you are undoubtedly well acquainted with anger, and anger being a very powerful emotion. How are you able to guide these women to channel their anger into something constructive?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that I would do is encourage the women to. Now, I facilitated the support groups and the parenting groups.
Okay.
And one of the things that I introduced into the groups were writing, journaling, just expressing their thoughts and their feelings. And the other thing that I would do is encourage dialogue, encourage, them to talk about these feelings, which are very complex feelings, because you're angry at somebody, but you love this person. Many of these women, it was interesting too that they would begin to downplay the abuse and even shift their anger at us, which made sense. It's sort of part of the process of just sort of going through the motions and trying to, peel back the layers of these very complicated feelings and getting ready. You're now at the threshold of making major life changes, and that's very scary. And sometimes, shifting your anger elsewhere and going back can seem like a safe solution, like, oh, it really wasn't so bad. So a lot of it too was really just encouraging this focus on themselves and on their children. And I feel like women really struggle with this because I feel like women will be angry and internalize that anger.
Well, it's the polite thing to do, Kim, isn't it?
Yeah. Exactly. And knowing that even myself, I have a very complex relationship with anger, because on one hand, anger is a very healthy emotion. All right. But when it transcends into bitterness, that can be problematic. And also when that anger, as I would, when I was working with my clients, when they would deflect the anger or turn it inward, they really had to sort of understand that that anger is okay, that they have a right to their anger. Okay. And it's sort of that old proverbial, it's not really about the dirty dishes in the sink. And sort of figuring out, like, what is it you're angry at? Because it's not the dishes in the sink. What is it? Let's talk about what that is. And part of managing anger and part of leaning into the anger and trying to process what it is and what's triggering it, is understanding that, yes, there is a place for it, and that, yes, there are healthy ways to deal with it. Like I said, journaling. And once you can do that, I think it's a healthy way to sort of process that anger and then be able to let it go. or, I know that for me, anger is a big, is a big deal in the sense that, I've had a very complicated life, and anger was always a huge part of that because I grew up with angry people. So I guess for me, the biggest challenge, certainly in my youth, was figuring out healthy ways to navigate anger. And that's what I would ultimately try to do with the women that I would work with. And like you said, using anger as a tool.
And now, here's an ad from our sponsor. In the mood for coffee, tea, yummy pastries, or cool swag? My friends at Infusco have got you covered. Infusco Coffee Roasters is a cozy neighborhood coffee joint in Sawyer and St. Joseph, Michigan. Infusco stands for a healthy community. They craft irresistible seasonal drinks, sourcing local artisans' products. The flavors shine from quality ingredients, and their beans are roasted on site. They do not hide behind tons of sugar. Every time I go, I'm greeted by my name with a smile. Bad service is just non-existent. It feels like stepping into a friend's living room. They keep it personal. Old school, eclectic coffee mugs on the wall, fun merch, including stickers designed by artists, t-shirts, and sweatshirts. It's the perfect place to get to know your neighbors and chat with tourists. You will always find people deep in conversation. Special events keep it fresh. Community. Health, the heart of Sawyer. That's Infusco. I hope to meet you there. Before I want to move on to how you dealt with your anger on behalf of the women you were helping. Before I get to that, I want to ask you mentioned journaling and speaking.
Yes.
So my mother is a cancer survivor, and I remember this was over 20 years ago, and I remember the hospital offering resources, and one of them was support groups. And
Yes.
My mom is not one to sit and talk about her feelings. It's just not what does it for her. So I'm wondering, in these complex cases, there's no one size fits all. So what if really talking about was just not accessible to that person, or if journaling was way too foreign, too scary to delve into? Yeah. So then what would happen in those cases?
Well, it's interesting because in a lot of those cases, I find that there has to be kind of a come to Jesus moment where you face it. Because what ultimately ends up happening is that anger takes over and you start deflecting the anger, you start turning it inward. And that's a whole other thing, is being willing and being open to directly dealing with the anger. And that will almost always involve confronting it and talking about it.
So maybe the fact that they had just come to the decision to flee,
right,
was a moment where that maybe was that come to Jesus moment where I have to do something.
Exactly. And look, it was never an easy thing, a lot of the women, honestly, particularly in that situation, they wanted to be left alone. They didn't want to talk about this. This whole kumbaya healing was kind of bullshit to them. They wasn't interesting. It was like, look, just help me get a place to live. That's all I need. I need to get my kids safe. And they were not interested in processing that. So to your point, Nadine, yeah, that was that was very challenging. Part of the program was that they had to attend these groups and they had to sit in sessions with me. And a lot of it was very reluctant, with great reluctance. So it was, but again, the interesting thing that I found was meeting them at their level was helpful, and giving them a space to just talk about whatever. So you don't want to talk about that? You don't want to talk about your anger? And it was interesting because it would lead back. They would open up, and there would be an opportunity for where something would come out that we would just end up talking about organically. So, I guess what I would say is keep an open mind. Keep an open mind, and that's what I would say, to my clients as well. It's like during the intake, I would say, just keep an open mind. Keep an open mind. Take what you like, leave the rest. And I think a lot of it too is, just this loss of control. I know that for me, nothing makes me angrier than not feeling in control. And I think that giving, control back, or, offering control can be helpful. Because I think a lot of it too is not feeling safe.
Sure. Sure. Yeah, your basic needs are not being met. The bottom of Maslow's hierarchy. So,
yes.
Okay, I do want to start shifting a little bit to your experience as a person in a service, a helping profession. I'm sure you dealt with a lot of personal frustration, personal anger in interacting, because how could you not? I can tell that you have empathy. So how do you function? How do you manage your own emotions? How do you manage your own frustration and anger? How did you do that? And what advice would you have for others who are in these professions?
Well, I think it's absolutely important that you are dealing with your own stuff while you are in the helping field. It's not only important that you're working and processing your stuff. It's a must. It is an absolute must, because a lot of that stuff is overlapping. You're even on your best day, there's just stuff that's going to trigger you. And I think that a lot of it can be very, very messy, and it becomes also where you're unable to distinguish or differentiate between what is your own stuff and what is actually happening. And it's very easy to get swept up in that. So boundaries you have to have very firm boundaries. You have to be very clear with what your role is in the client's life. You're not their friend. So they should not be calling you at your phone, at home. They should not be texting you. They should not be. It has to be a very compartmentalized thing. And, especially since, and I know that for myself, that was something that I struggled with. Because having empathy means you want to be the friend. You want to be there in a way that maybe this person has never had before. But really, your role is understanding that you're there to help them create these relationships outside. You're not it, because your role is to help them from this stage and then move into their own independent lives, where they're now creating healthy relationships with others.
So how did you know, not to say that you didn't learn a lot about yourself on the job, but how did you know that you were capable of doing this work? And when I say that, so I'm a retired physician. And when we were going through the process of choosing our specialties, you try different specialties.
Yes.
And
My
for me, it
sister
was
a physician, and yes.
So, yeah.
Absolutely.
So, for me, it was very cut and dry. When I would be in a rotation, I'd do it and say, oh, this is okay, but I can't do this. This is not for me. So I learned, and my point being, when I see an oncologist, pediatric oncologist, outside, even my vet, I'm like, how you have to be a uniquely qualified is not.
No, but I know exactly.
Well, you need to, but so how did you know that you could take on such immense responsibility?
Well, I think for me, a lot of it just really came from, first I'll say I really didn't even know that I could. And a lot of it stemmed from, because initially I was doing a lot of freelance stuff. I was working in theater. I was doing some acting, and then I wanted work that was meaningful to me, and I knew that I didn't have the temperament to wait tables or do something in that regard. So working with people that were struggling was actually appealing to me. Because in many ways, I saw myself in the women that I worked with. And that sort of made me understand, like, this is something I can do. This is something that I would find rewarding. This is something that matters in the world that we live in. Now, this, of course, was a very, I guess you could say, naive outlook, because a lot of it I didn't know. A lot of it was very new. But as I journeyed along, and one of the things that I did come to understand as an adult was the importance of self-care and the importance of mental health. And so as soon as I was old enough to sort of recognize that was a component in my life that had never been addressed, I began therapy. And part of that was because I came from a very chaotic and a very abusive household. I grew up with abuse. And so it felt like a natural fit that I would work with people in these situations, trying to get out of these situations, trying to do better for themselves, do better for their children.
So there's this relationship, this pure professional relationship between you and the survivor, but you also have to navigate the workplace.
That's a whole other animal.
Yeah, that's a whole other animal. So navigating the workplace politics can feel like a minefield. What did you learn about keeping calm and managing your anger and staying focused in those situations when you felt like, oh, if we can just cut through the red tape?
I don't know. I will tell you, it is so depressing. It is so depressing because, which was why I knew that it wasn't a field I could stay in.
Okay.
Because I could not wrap my head around that. Prioritizing the bottom line over people was just not in my DNA. I did. I had a lot of challenges with that. I had a lot of challenges with administration. I remember on a report that they give, one of the things that they had said about me was that I was not supportive in tough administrative decisions. So, yeah, because I would call it out. That was my, I really took my role as the client's advocate very seriously. And I just, if something didn't look right, if something, just in the same way that the women were expected to follow these rules and do what they had to do, I felt like I owed it to them to speak on their behalf, to address, the man, if you will, when it all came down to it. And it was just really hard it was hard for me. And I guess, as a young woman at the time navigating that, I was definitely naive. And I was definitely just sort of like in this perpetual state of just outrage at the system and how a lot of these women ended up here and how so many of my clients were, just out of foster care. And here we are now, and just the services just not being what they should be.
Not enough.
Yes. And this sense that I could make it better somehow, which again is naive. And you do need money. You do need funds. These are all things that need to be considered. But it was just like a lot. It was a lot. And I think for me also, a lot of my own stuff would overlap, because I saw myself as I could have been here. I could have been here. This could be me. There before the grace of God go I. This could have been me. So it was a very personal attachment as well. So that's the other thing too. I don't think this work is good for somebody that that has issues with boundaries, which I feel like I did. You have to be able to disconnect. And
I heard you talk about this on another podcast where you talked about the importance of compartmentalizing, because you were actually talking about your work with Slaycation, and
yes,
these are real cases of these are true crimes, and you're able to compartmentalize in order to be able to tell these stories.
Yes. Exactly. I mean, and, that's the thing, too. Again, it's sort of putting on my research cap where I try to understand why people do the horrible things that they do to each other. Of course, I have no answers. So
I'm going to ask you this, because this is a phrase that actually drives me nuts. Everyone is doing the best that they can. Are they?
That's, yeah.
Are they really?
You. I don't, to me, I feel like everybody could be doing better and they're not. And I feel like that phrase, honestly, is just kind of an excuse to not push yourself, to not look at yourself.
Take responsibility.
To not take responsibility, not self-reflect. That's how I see it. And, as somebody that has, just, juggled a lot of different things, different experiences, growing up in chaos, trying to create a home that's not that. I felt like my whole goal in life has always been do better. Do better.
I had a guest on a podcast a few years ago. Her name is Joyce Martyr, and Joyce is a therapist. an author. And one of the things that she said has really stood or taken deep root with me, and I just can't forget it. And what she said is, anger is the bodyguard of sadness. And as I've been listening you talk about your work, your personal struggles, that really spoke to me. How do you see anger? Are there pros and cons to expressing anger? What do you think about that phrase?
I'll tell you. And that's very interesting and thought-provoking insight. So when I was growing up, my father was a tyrant. All right. He was an angry, angry man, and he was hostile. Okay. And when he went into one of his rages, it was like one of those things that I would literally start to have a panic attack when I would hear him come through the door, because you just didn't know what was going to happen. Was he going to come pull me out of my bed? Was he going to scream in my face all night? Was he going to hit my mother? Was he going to chase her around the house with a cleaver? These were all things that were a part of my reality. And the thing that frustrated me so was that my mother never got angry. Nadine, she never got angry. He would spit in her face. He would call her names. I mean, and I'm talking about in front of us. And I mean disgusting names that, like, fighting names. If somebody called me these names, I don't care who you are, we're going to fight. Names like that. Threatening threats of violence, infidelity. I mean, and she never got angry.
Did that frustrate you at the time?
It not only frustrated me, it angered me. I was so angry. So angry. I was angry at her for not standing up for herself. I was angry at her for letting this man speak to her and address her like this. Her children. I was angry at her for not protecting her children. I was angry at her. I mean, and this is for, I mean, all thoughts are going on in my head, and I'm I guess a tween at this time. And what ended up happening was I became so angry that I began to identify with my father. I began to understand. Yeah, no, it's been I began to understand anger as a form of protection. And so my thing became match energy. So any relationship that I would have would be, not only am I going to match energy, I'm going to surpass what you bring. So I then sort of morphed into what my dad was. So I enjoyed, or not, I enjoyed a series of very toxic and unhealthy relationships.
So it was very polar, where you're looking at your mom, who's, it sounds like passive, if I may use that word.
Absolutely.
Versus a very active force
very
in your
passive.
dad. So pros and cons on both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I look back on my behavior, it was kind of like, oh, wow, that's what you're doing. Like, so here I am, and I'm meet somebody, and, like my husband, for example, who certainly did not have the chaos that, I grew up with. But the interesting thing was, was I began to see myself sort of morph into my father. I became because the thing was, in my mind, my anger was going to keep me from being victimized. So when I felt slighted or hurt, and it was like I was going to come at it with so much more than what, my husband would even say to me. He would say it doesn't match the infraction. Like you're so over the top with this.
I see.
It's so much more than what I would have thought. Like you're annoyed at the way I spoke to you, and you are treating me as if I slept with your sister. And I found that one of the things that anger, I had serious trouble regulating my emotions. All right. And I think that's been sort of my personal struggle, my personal journey, and sort of coming to the place where, yes, I understand this is what it is. Because before I didn't understand that. I understood it as me protecting myself, me not taking any shit or any guff from anybody. This is what you have to do in a relationship, is establish where you want to stand. And, honestly, I don't quite understand like what was going on with my father. I mean, I have some hints. It's like when you're cycling through abusive childhoods and, but I knew that I was turning into him, and I knew that that's not what I wanted to be. And it was also one of the reasons why I was really resistant having children, because I knew I was a little extra. and I knew that I so parenting, I did not want to inflict that rage onto anybody else. But, a lot of, just navigating a lot of heavy duty terrain and making sense of it and putting it in a place where, as we talked about earlier, that is useful, and seeking out things that are comforting to me and that feel good. And that's one of the things where I got to be so crafty. I learned how to crochet, and it's weird but I learned how to crochet, and I learned how to knit, and I really just find these practices very soothing, very meditative. One of the things that I would also encourage is meditation. Not everybody likes meditation, but I know for me, the practice of a craft, no matter what it is, just the sitting with it and the quiet of it is very centering and very peaceful. So I do it a lot.
This is the perfect place to ask you about this. I've been wondering about this as you've been talking to. I know you left the work largely because of bureaucracy, politics, wearing on you. But still, in that time, in your personal life, as you've been describing, taking the leap and getting married and having children, even in the darkest circumstances, you've managed to find and offer hope. It sounds like to me.
Yes.
Besides these meditative practices that you're beginning to describe, what has helped you stay connected to kindness and hope?
Because Nadine, I think we all deserve that. I think that is something we all deserve. We all come into this world as children, innocent. And somehow we're corrupted. I just always feel that we are all entitled to kindness. And I go out of my way to be kind. I often wondered if my father, if anybody was ever kind to him. I almost think not, And, one of the things that I started to really think about too was, my dad, he was he grew up down south. He grew up in the thick of Jim Crow. He was a contemporary of Emmett Till, George Stinney. This was his reality. This was his world. I often, this was his reality. You couldn't look a white person in their face. And I often wondered how much of that played into what he brought with.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing. Now, my father spoke very negatively. He would make, comments about white people and stuff like that. But it was interesting to note that my mother was a white woman. And and she was not his, he's had other partners. And part of me, I would wonder if this was sort of his way of, if I could use the word get back or revenge. I don't know. I don't know what the word is, but I very much felt, as I look back, that there was some dynamic there.
Dominance?
Yeah.
Did you feel love?
It's very strange, and that's, and part of me used to think oddly enough, I did. I felt like he did love us. I felt the peculiar thing about my dad was when me or my sister was sick, he was the one that sat vigil. He was the one making the tea. He was the one doing that nurturing. And that was very special. And when he wasn't being crazy, he was fun to be around.
Mm.
But he was unpredictable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's even something that I struggle with today. I pay very close attention in my adulthood. This is one of the things that, when to answer your question about kindness and how do I, is I often wonder what difference could have been made. My mother grew up in a home that she often recalled was very cold, unloving. And it felt like she really sort of longed for attention. And it was interesting too, because her parents were kind of racist.
Kinda.
Kinda. I'm being nice. And the interesting thing, I started to describe them as my father was fuck you to the man, to the white patriarch establishment. And my mother was like, fuck you to her family. And that's, not really the way to come together and bring children into the world.
So these are different, not so healthy ways of handling their angry issues.
Exactly. And one of the things that I remember as a child that I longed for, Nadine, was a sane adult. Was just a sane adult to just be there. And so a lot of the kindness that I really channel is from that perspective. being, what do you need? Somebody to say a kind word? I'm going to say a kind word. What do you need? Do you, need somebody to talk to about whatever? I mean, and the thing about kindness is kindness can be facilitated in the simplest of acts, the smallest of acts. It's when somebody is just a little short at the grocery store and maybe they are about $3 short and they don't have it. Here, I'll pay that for you. It's seeing a mom struggling with a child and just saying, I get it, I've been there, just take a deep breath and let it go and move forward. It's really very simple, which I guess is why I'm so flummoxed by the society that we're navigating right now, where kindness does not seem to be in the equation at all.
Well, it's not common. And I actually find myself...
kind of makes me sad.
It's sad, and I actually find myself surprised. I'm always taken off guard when somebody does something kind when I'm out. And I think that's right. Sad, as you said. I think it's very sad that that's not the go-to. Right. It really isn't. It really isn't. Extending grace is not the go-to. Extending compassion is not the go-to. Extending empathy, definitely not the go-to. And, I think, and I guess that's one of the things that I find myself wanting to ask the universe, or, mostly the people in it, like, why are you so angry? What is going on that I know why I'm angry, but I still care. But you also work on it. And you also work on it, and that you recognize it, you have awareness of it, and you are taking many steps to make sure that you are navigating your feelings in a healthy manner. We're not saying that anger is a bad thing in and of itself.
Exactly.
It can be very healthy, but as you said earlier, it's a tool. And knowing when to be able to stop yourself when it's not going to be appropriate to express it. Exactly. And knowing when it's not going to be helpful, and knowing that it's not going to be useful. And also understanding that there are ways in which you can use or even manifest the anger, what you can do. I mean, I know that I grew up being very angry at my parents for different reasons and blaming them for a lot of my own shortcomings. And that anger had sort of began to manifest itself in relationships. And my husband, and when I started to recognize myself as being abusive, it was a moment of, oh, wow, you've got to stop. Is this really who you are? Is this really what you want to lean into? And luckily, that's the other thing too, is, I was very much about partnering with somebody that was emotionally healthy. Okay. And partnering with somebody that would give me the space to communicate and hear me when I say, here's what I'm feeling. It's irrational. I'm going to own that. It's a little over the top. And I'm going to need to
address that over here. I'm going to just take a breath, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about what I felt you did that upset me. And having him understand that a lot of it, again, it's not the dirty dishes in the sink. So let me figure that out, and I'll come back and we'll, work it through.
Your own timeouts.
Yes, exactly.
Invoked your own timeouts. You took your timeouts.
Girl, I had to because it's a pretty astonishing thing what you could come up with when you are sitting in time out. What is coming up for you? And that's what I would sit with. Why are you so angry? Okay. What is this bringing up? Okay. And how do we make it better? And that's the thing. And I knew that if I was going to have children, my whole being would need to be dedicated to helping this child be emotionally healthy and understand healthy relationships, understand healthy management of feelings, understanding how to self-regulate, and understand while at the same time that even if they're experiencing irrational anger, they're entitled to those feelings. Let's feel those feelings. Let's process them. Let's not hurt anybody. Okay. And, that's been, I think, a huge part of my journey. And sort of this conscientious effort to break the cycle.
So what would be your biggest piece of advice, your simplest piece of advice for those who are feeling overwhelmed? Maybe they're unable to process their anger. They can't identify it. They're not ready to deal with it. What would be the most heartfelt, simple piece of guidance you could offer them?
I would say that consider what it is that you're angry about and what you want to happen. And let's take it from there. All right. And understand what it is that you angry about, really angry about, not the back and forth, not the dishes, but what you're really angry about. Just think about, how can I make that better? How can I make that better? What would make that better? And just sit with that. Just sit with that.
Yeah, that's powerful. Thank you.
And I think also too, one of the things that really gets lost in anger, and one of the things that I'm, really that I really leaned into as I journey through my anger management is this the way? Because I was kind of a tyrant. I was a tyrant. I am a tyrant. I'm still a tyrant. I'm a work in progress. I still lose my shit. But I always come back to, is this how you want to address somebody that you love and respect? And if it's somebody that you don't love and respect, then you need to get away from them. Then you have to start looking at that.
I love it. Oh my goodness. This conversation is definitely going to stay with me for a long time. I really am very grateful.
Thank you, Nadine, for allowing me the opportunity to speak on these things that pretty much stay pretty much right here, like in my own head. So being able to share and to, talk about my experiences is a huge gift. So I thank you for that.
my final question for my guests is always, what is your personal definition of what it means to be healthy?
My personal definition of being healthy is making sure that you are caring for yourself, that you are setting boundaries and that you are firm on those boundaries. Okay? And another thing that I always say this, as we go out into the world and we don't always have control of the craziness and the madness that we have to deal with, let us make every attempt to keep, when we come into our homes and we shut the door, have that chaos and that craziness be on the other side. Being healthy means keeping your home safe, sound, and crazy free. And
mic drop.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's a lot, I mean, I too am I'm a cancer survivor. And it's also really brought home for me what I should be prioritizing. And I think that we all could benefit from really thinking about that just in our everyday lives. And again, what we want our homes to look like. I am so happy in my home. I feel like my home is the healthiest place on earth. I feel like when I walk in my door, that the crazy person that I was dealing with on the subway, the little spat that, I was having because somebody cut me off. I mean, all of that stuff just fades away when I walk into my house and I shut the door, and all of that's on the other side. And I feel like that is healthy. That's what everyone needs to create for themselves and within the dynamics of their relationships. And that, to me, is the best thing ever.
Kim, thank you. Thank you so very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It was an absolute pleasure.
Wise women, move from last place to first place in your life. Stop using your body as a battlefield. Let's raise health together with a customized health plan just for you. Contact me at npkhealthintegration.com. Thanks for listening. See you next time.